Welcome to Meatbone Express, the filmmaking podcast. Today we're talking with filmmaker Amiel Courtin-Wilson about his film Rouen, which is the exciting follow-up to Hail. Amiel, how are you today?
Really well, actually. Just really enjoying finally having Ruin screened in cinemas around the country, and yeah, it's a pleasure to say hello.
So Rouen is a pretty radical production. Can you tell me about how it got started and what it is and where it's shot?
Absolutely. So the film's co-directed, co-produced, and co-written with Michael Cody, who was the producer on my first fictional feature film, Hail. And we basically had just premiered Hail at the Venice Film Festival, and Michael wanted to take a trip to Cambodia, wanted to work on a project there, and invited me along. And it was a very open-ended, amorphous invitation. It was really, it might have ended up, manifesting as a photo essay or a short documentary. We really had no idea what the project was going to evolve into, but we landed with really, as I said, no script, no financing, and just for me, I'd not been to the country before, so I was really trying to make my naivety a virtue of sorts. We met a wonderful Cambodian producer, Kulika Soto, who ended up really becoming our passport to a myriad of quite amazing contacts. Everything from various NGOs to ex-police officers to young women who'd been trafficked as children to just a huge array of Cambodian artists and filmmakers. And she was really instrumental in providing us the framework to do the very intensive 5 weeks of research and writing that led to a treatment for the film that led to an 18-day shoot in November 2011. So it was from landing in Cambodia to the moment we started shooting the film was about 5 weeks, and in many respects that was kind of an exercise or an experiment in just sheer momentum and Michael Cody and I's respective interest in the core themes of trauma, and I suppose how trauma resides in the body and the way in which language tends to or can fall down around your ability to articulate that trauma.
So what is it like diving into a project without a completed script?
Well, it's for me coming from a documentary background. I shot documentaries for close to 12 years before I shot my first feature-length, drama. So, in many respects, I'm actually still shocked at how relaxed and easy it is compared to shooting a straight observational documentary film, where at times it's literally just a one-person crew, or at best a two-person crew when you're shooting a documentary, and the idea of having a schedule where actors show up and people occasionally bring you food is such a, like, seriously, without being sounding flippant, it's such a comparatively such a luxury that I still feel really quite a huge degree of like freedom and liberation, even though we don't have a fully scripted document that we're working from. More often than not, it's like the the guts, or the skeleton of the dramatic function of the scene is there. It's really just the dialogue that hasn't yet been developed. So that's really what we dialogue, and then also obvious things like blocking and shot size and stuff. But in many respects, also the joy of working in Cambodia, we decided to shoot the film pretty much primarily in Khmer. So obviously Michael or I don't speak Khmer, so we had that to deal with as well, and that actually led to a very natural shedding of a lot of dialogue. So the film is very gestural, and I think the two lead actors have, I wouldn't imagine more than maybe like 40 lines of dialogue in the entire film. So it's a very still film, very silent film, and that was certainly informed by the fact that it was interesting to work with gesture and the body more than with dialogue. So yeah, an interesting series of explorations.
The film is told much more visually. Would you describe it as a non-narrative film?
No, it's actually in essence a very simple love story. It's sort of a lovers on the run, almost like a Bonnie and Clyde uh, type romance. It just happens to be set in modern day Phnom Penh, and then the characters move out into the jungles of Cambodia. I think it was described early on in the edit as somewhat of like a Cambodian Badlands. So the story is while it's not particularly heavy on plot, it's actually a very simple, I mean, almost like fable like narrative. And while there are like impressionistic flourishes throughout the film and a lot of um, you know um, extreme slow motion and a lot of quite abstract imagery, it's all really in service of this very simple meditation on how love can briefly transcend a life of trauma, I suppose.
This is a really a radical production, and it seems like a lot of risks are taken. What went to plan, and what didn't go to plan while you were doing this?
Yeah, that's a great question. There were strangely the looking back on the experience, especially co-directing the film, and we also had three editors on the project. I've co-directed one other film, which was which is an interesting experience. There was a few hiccups along the way. It should have been, I think, a far more complex and maybe at times taxing process. But I think because Cody and I were so adamant about everything that we did being really in service of this core thematic preoccupation with this idea of trauma, and as it most particularly like how trauma lives in the body, we were able to, and also because of the small size of the crew, quite often if we had differing ideas about a scene or the dramatic function of a scene, rather than like duking it out in pre-production, we would just decide to shoot both versions of the scene and work it out in the edit. I mean, obviously, working in Cambodia, there's like, and we were shooting in some, fairly precarious scenarios, like filming in actual brothels and filming in, at times we had to have police escorts and police escorts with machine guns in certain locations. Funnily enough, not really for the local inhabitants. It was mainly to do with the corrupt landlords who were actually owners of huge tracts of land that we were shooting on. So those kind of issues, negotiating location fees at the last minute, and those the very pragmatic logistical complications due to working in a country that is certainly corrupt at times. But I think all things considered, it was sort of insanely smooth process. I mean, at times you would, for example, we cast a supporting character, a woman playing the mother of Mooney, the lead character in the film, and you get to location to film this scene, and the woman that we auditioned and decided not to cast is waiting for us, and not the woman we cast, and there's no time to really change that, so you just proceed and shoot the scene with this other actress. I mean, and things are lost in translation quite a lot. But again, because we had such a small crew, there wasn't really too much lost along the various kind of chains of different departments and stuff. I think the crew at its largest was around 17 people. So, the idea of being able to fit everyone in 3 vans or 2 vans means that, you can keep a pretty tight ship, and it also means you can respond to things really organically. So the wonderful one of the wonderful bonuses of working in this organic fashion is there's a beautiful fish market that features in the first half of the film, and that was actually discovered probably about 4 days before we finished shooting by a location scout. So that was written into the film, and we found ourselves shooting there the very next day. So those kind of things, being able to respond to that organically to the world around you, again, coming from a documentary background, is really kind of a godsend. I can put up with certain actors not turning up to be able to work with that kind of fluidity, I think.
Is it true that you had equipment stolen during the production of the film?
Yeah, that's true. Actually, we did. we were working with we met an amazing group of people at a NGO that was in essence a needle exchange, or sort of part rehab, crisis center, drop-in center, needle exchange for intravenous drug users in Phnom Penh, and we cast probably about six people in various roles from that. But yeah, we had one evening we had the crew's cell phones were all stolen by a young, very adept ice addict pickpocket who managed to steal our cell phones on a number of occasions, actually. And we knew that he'd done it, and he'd sold our cell phones for ice, or methamphetamine. But I don't know. I'm not one to get overly angry at things like that. So we just asked him not to do it again, and I think we shot with him like the next day. So I think very quickly the people we were collaborating with realized that we were maybe a little more relaxed than other film productions, certainly with things like that. And it ended up leading to that same guy who stole our cell phones actually like helping be sort of an on-location security guard to protect us from other people who are looking to potentially steal equipment. So yeah, those things are can happen anywhere, and certainly happened in Cambodia. But I never felt as though we were more unsafe or any less kind of supported than you would be working in, say, the western suburbs of Melbourne or Sydney, I suppose.
You've gone to Cambodia. I understand, without funding and without a full script. It's hard enough making a film in your own country, let alone another and in another language. What methodology got you over the line here?
Yeah, look, I think it was really about Michael and I saying that we wanted to take what we'd learnt from Hale and try to distill that and further that in terms of a methodology that was really about taking the most exhilarating parts of the filmmaking process, and that involves several things. That's about working with friends, with collaborators that know and understand the way that you work. So we worked with some of the same, at least half, probably the same crew as we worked with on Hale. And again, these people have all worked in documentary, worked in this sort of hybrid space, for want of a better term, and it allows you to push everyone. And there's one thing that is certain when working in this kind of way. Like, I don't think there was a day that went by that wasn't at least 16 hours. I know the last week of the shoot we were sort of pushing up to around 18, 20-hour days. For 3 or 4 days we were shooting down in Kampot to just to nail everything that we needed to nail. But there's such a wonderfully more than collegiate. It's an unbelievably supportive bond in which, because you don't have the usual hierarchies of a film set where if you look at the credits of Rouen, most people have 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 roles on the film, and by working in that way, inevitably everyone becomes that much more invested in the film, and you find this really wonderful, exponentially growing sense of commitment to the work. And literally, to give you an example, it's like a PA or a data wrangler working in the post production side of things during the film discovered an amazing location for us. Again, like a week into the shoot, because they were equally invested and knew the themes of the work and knew that they could contribute in a really meaningful way. So that makes everyone feel very, very alive and sensitized to being able to contribute really meaningfully. And I love that. It lends itself to a very generous and kind of open and warm way of working.
How important was sound and sound design, music score to this picture?
I had the pleasure of working with Rob McKenzie and Sam Petty, sound designers and sound mixers who I'd worked with before. I'd worked with Rob on my last two feature films, and Rob and Sam are both really impeccable in terms of their craft, and both have a really wonderful aesthetic that is predicated on this idea of a certain kind of elegance coming from a minimalism sonically throughout a work. So it was really about stripping things out of the film more than like layering things in. And in terms of the music, I worked again with Steve Benwell, who's a composer I'd worked with on three of my prior films, and I love to gather as much score as I can, or at least sketches of the type of I suppose like sonic universe we'll be employing for the film as early as possible. So I actually had about an hour and a half of material from Steve before we actually shot, that we took over with us to Cambodia, that the editors had from day one of the edit. And then that was then augmented with a range of really beautiful source music that we licensed from a range of primarily American like minimalist composers from the 60s and 70s. So film composers like Phil Niblock and Charlemagne Palestine, and unbelievably potent and powerful work, but to my mind also grossly underrated and not really utilized, or certainly not in the world of film enough. So yeah, it was a mixture of probably about 6 licensed tracks and about 5 tracks composed specifically for the film by Steve Benwell.
That's really interesting because sound is often thought of as an afterthought and something you will make to go with an image, but it almost sounds like you've created some images to go with sounds.
Yeah, absolutely. I think quite often a film for me will, at its most nascent stage, have some kind of germination from a particular piece of music. Certainly, ideas for shots or scenes, come from music, probably more often than any other art form for me. So, music is unbelievably important in the way that we work, and it's a real quite often when you're working with a sound designer, a sound mixer, because obviously the score is only really substantially developed from the time at which the pitch is locked, or the edit's completed. For the editor to be able to play with that amount of specificity in terms of just even something as simple as a scene transition or a crossfade between 2 music cues. So by the time you get into the mix, we actually mix the film unbelievably quickly. Like it doesn't quite, looking back, it doesn't actually quite make sense how fast I think the mix was done in like 3 days, I think, which for a feature film is really, really, really fast. But that's really because we were using so much music in the edit that we knew would be able to, A, afford, or B, had been composed for us specifically. By the time you get to the mix, it's really about, Rob and Sam's, really joyous job is really about refining and finding, new levels of sophistication for what is, pretty much already there, schematically speaking, I suppose.
This is a highly anticipated film. Hail is very popular with cinephiles in Australia, and your work is sort of very highly regarded, and it's also done really well overseas, winning a prize at Venice. Can you tell me why you're self-distributing the film?
It's really lovely over the last 10 or so years to see a slowly growing base of people around the country who are aware of our work. That's always really humbling and very, very inspiring to attend screenings where people have followed what we've done since, I suppose, Varsity is probably or even sometimes going back all the way to Chasing Buddha, 20 years ago. But in terms of the release of Rouen, like Varsity feature doc that I made, and which was released about 7 years ago, that was actually self-distributed by myself and Philippa Campi through Palace Cinemas. Then Hail was, while it was a Madman title, I handled two cities of the distribution in two cities, and Madman handled two cities. So it was kind of a split distribution deal. On Ruin, Madman have all other rights to the film for Australia and New Zealand, and because for a film like this, it was looking a little bit difficult in terms of leveraging a traditional theatrical release. We managed to get the theatrical rights back from Madman, and that just took a little bit of time and negotiating, and so hence the decision for us to self-distribute the film in Adelaide, Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne, and with other cities to follow. So the other thing too that's been really exciting about this is, I think, recognizing that people need and want more from their cinema experience, and taking a leaf out of the books of places such as Cine Family or Alamo Drafthouse in the United States, and so hence our decision to, where possible, have each screening be like an event screening of sorts with a Q&A, or as an example, in Brisbane at Goma, we're showing a 45-minute re-edit of the film with a live score composed by Oren Ambarchi, featuring a lot of material not seen in the film, and I think increasingly, it's not dissimilar to the Cinema Plus endeavour that Rob Connolly's put together. I think it's actually a good thing to put the onus on the filmmakers to try to provide more, I suppose, creative assets for audiences to respond to, as well as the film itself.
Does that give you more control as a filmmaker when you're sort of involved in the exhibition process?
Look, I think with a film of this scale, you tend to be pretty hands-on, whether you're working with a distributor or not. Realistically, like, you're always, I suppose, going to want to make sure that your baby doesn't drown as it takes its first steps into a very cold and dark ocean. But I think, look, it does give you more control. I think I always love collaborating at this end of the street as well, though. So I do love working with distributors. It's always a joy to have a new set of eyes on your work, and to see it interpreted in terms of how certain audiences could respond to certain elements of the film. So, but having the freedom this time round to do things like this live score performance at Goma with Oren is, that's really exciting. That's really new terrain for me. So that kind of thing, certainly, that wouldn't be feasible working with a traditional distributor.
We had a conference recently in Adelaide called the Screenmakers Conference, and it seems that the thesis was about finding what the audience wants and sort of back engineering your project from that, which to me doesn't really seem like personal filmmaking. How would you describe sort of personal filmmaking in Australia and sort of in this age? What challenges are there, and what advice would you give to people that really want to be following their hearts, even though they may be advised to be trying to make something a theoretical audience wants?
Yeah, look, I would say just make more work. I would say make more varied work. I would say, where possible, compartmentalize your creative output so you are making absolutely uncompromising personal films that are, reverse engineered, I suppose, more specifically around, what makes that film able to be shot. So, be that location or cast, or, the pragmatic logistical concerns that just allow you to get the film made, I suppose. So, I personally speaking, I have always got upwards of half a dozen projects on the boil, ranging from video installations to feature docs to, I'm executive producer on a couple of emerging filmmakers' first features. I think that's really the main key is keeping yourself very nimble and very, very across a range of types of work. But I think also, there's really, really no excuse not to be making your own personal cinema. Now more than ever. It's a conversation that has been really pertinent for probably 20 years since the advent of digital video. but it's increasingly, the case. So while I think, both state and federal funding bodies could absolutely, and I would, be the first person to champion them funding more low budget films and providing a voice to a wider range of emerging filmmakers. By the same token, there's no benefit in waiting around for that money to come, and I think filmmakers need to just start making work. And the more prolific and the more uncompromising you can be in that, I think the quicker you find your voice, and the I think it also helps forge much stronger filmmaking communities ultimately, because people are then forced to help one another. So yeah, that kind of ecosystem is really key. And while I'm an eternal optimist, I do feel as though we could be certainly doing a lot more in Australia. I would like to see like a lot more films being made here each year.
Could you expand on making films without funding? A lot of people go to film school and they're taught an industrial approach, but once they get out of film school, there isn't the funding there that there once was. Can you kind of describe how to cross that threshold and maybe some very simple pointers on how you really can make films for basically nothing?
Yeah, look, we shot Hail on 16 mil, and we got to Cambodia. I think between us, Michael and I had probably about $8,000 that we'd managed to borrow. So we had a budget of around 8 grand. We then met Kulika Soto, our Cambodian producer, and she provided us with probably around 10 grand of in-kind support. So that came in the form of a month worth of van hire, translators, and a couple other things. Very, 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 very minimal. So as a result, we had to work out how we were going to make a film. And while we wanted to shoot on film at that time, we realized that we had to shoot on 5Ds, which I was at the time very dubious about, but was quickly convinced by Ari Wegner, our cinematographer, and we basically wrote the film to the strengths of the format we were shooting on. So the film was set primarily at night, and certainly, working in 5D, fluorescent light and low light, it's a sort of a more forgiving kind of environment in which to use that camera. So, and then we literally called about 6 of our friends and said, we're making a film in Cambodia. There's literally no money. We don't really know what we're doing, but come along for 3 weeks and see what happens. We were subsequently able to raise money for that film and pay everyone, but that was well after the fact. So I think, but through that process, we were able to get enough material in the can to then show funding bodies, to then show people that, okay, these cast are amazing, and this is an amazing world, and the story needs a little bit of development, but there's seeds there that are worth supporting. So I think again it comes down to, you have to take that initial risk to just start shooting. I think I've seen so many filmmakers just really flounder in this development space for years and years and years, and it's just so important to start for your own sake. Let alone this, the necessity of people need to see images from your story to then excite them enough to potentially invest. But just to keep you sane, it's so important to be making work. So there's really no excuse not to at all anymore. I just want to see more Australian films from more Australian filmmakers.
The way you describe it seems as simple as a painter should paint, a filmmaker should be making films. You just got to stay active, and you describe people sort of floundering, waiting for answers, waiting for things. It seems like what you've done is take a risk, but there's this phenomena where people, as soon as they see you take a risk, go, I want to be on board, and that seems to have attracted an energy.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I mean, it certainly helps that I've made a few films before and people know my previous work. But having said that, the same principles were absolutely at play 15 years ago when I was deciding to shoot my first documentary in the United States, and I borrowed $3,000 and a camera and convinced a production company at age 18 to go and shoot what became Chasing Buddha with a high school friend of mine. I mean, that ability to infect and instill a certain kind of inspiration in your collaborators, I think is if you it really should be present. And if it's not, maybe you're not necessarily telling the right story because you're not excited enough about it.
Before we go into the screenings which are happening across Australia, could you tell me about some of your filmmaking and artistic heroes in Australia and the world?
Absolutely. I am a huge fan of Rolf de Heer. I think his ability to just consistently create such high caliber, personal, and really very alive work is makes him easily one of the most interesting filmmakers in the country. I also absolutely adore the films of James Clayton, who is a Melbourne filmmaker. He's made 5 feature-length films. He merges a really remarkable, very potent and visceral mixture of Brechtian theatre, video diary, and found footage, and also like very impressionistic abstract imagery into these like really confounding, almost unclassifiable concoctions that I absolutely adore. I think he's the most interesting filmmaker working in Australia today, and also again grossly underrated. And internationally, I am really interested in the work of Roberto Minervini, an Italian director working in the United States, who has a somewhat similar sort of point on the compass in terms of the way he traverses this hybrid space or documentary drama methodology. I also love the work of Carlos Regatas, Philippe Grandier, Claire Denis, A Picture upon Cole, and but then on the other side of the street, I absolutely adore Will Ferrell films, and I'm a great admirer of Michael Mann, and so it's certainly not just art cinema that I find myself drawn to. So a wide range of work.
Where is the film being shown at the moment? It's in multiple states, multiple venues.
So right now we're screening the film in Sydney at the Golden Age Cinema. With Michael Cody's up there running Q&A events. We've got a screening on the 27th with a Q&A moderated by Sarana Massacre, who's a wonderful film critic based up in Sydney. And in Melbourne, I'm running there'll be Q&A screenings of Rouen the next 2 Saturdays, so the 26th of November and the 3rd of December at Acme Cinemas. And then obviously we've got a screening organised by your fine self at the Mercury in Adelaide.
Yeah, and we're very excited. I just want to ask about your collaboration with Michael Cody. What is the kind of delegation of roles? You've both directed the film. Is there much overlap, or what are each of your strengths, and how did you sort of complement each other?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Michael Cody has a background, very strong background in academia, and as well as several years spent as a foreign correspondent in Southeast Asia. And I think what Michael brings or brought to the film was unbelievable intellect and extremely rigorous interrogation of the underlying themes of the film, as well as really being amazingly relentless in his desire to make sure that this work we were creating wasn't going to somehow deteriorate into something that, felt like a film created by two white middle class friends going to Cambodia. So that was whereas for me, coming from a documentary background, I tend to dive in and try to make my naivety of a place or of people a virtue of sorts, and try to retain a certain kind of conduit-like relationship with the people I'm working with. So I think somehow um, those two natural ways of working seem to complement each other. As I said earlier, like surprisingly well. It could have been really a total nightmare, but it was like a joy.
Well, who had the coolest head? Because I mean, you had crazy stuff happen in this film, and actors not turning up, equipment, phones stolen. Did you both have a cool head, or did you kind of swap? One person would be relaxed and keep the situation stable. Like, how does that work?
I think I think at times I'm trying to think. Um, we actually managed to maintain really quite good humor throughout the whole process, even when things, really, really, really went more than astray. I suppose, an actor turning up that you had specifically not cast because they just couldn't nail the scene, and then being forced to because of the location you're in, to then try to make that scene work. I mean, that's beyond frustrating, and just. But I think for the most part, the mishaps or the hiccups that happened along the way were kind of so absurd that we were able to find some kind of humor in them. I mean, to give you an example, we were filming in this extremely remote location because we were basically with a phantom camera filming some homemade explosives being let off in a field, which comprised pretty much of a few coconuts filled with gunpowder. And because of the explosion sounds, even though we'd sought permission from the local police, we were filming quite late at night, and a local police officer decided to arrive on his motorbike, very, very drunk, and started waving a gun in our face, demanding that he see our permit. We gave him our permit, and then he demanded, yeah, money. So I think we ended up giving him like $100 or something. But you're dealing with those kind of slippages in terms of, I suppose, the producerial end of the filmmaking process. So I think, yeah, who lost our temper more easily? Look, I think neither of us did really. It was like, because when things would go wrong, they would go so drastically wrong. They were kind of absurd. So I found them to be like, erring on being almost humorous, I suppose. And I think that also comes from working with friends, and just really, really, really enjoying the process. Like, it's so much fun working like this, and because you're working with a bunch of people you trust and you love, it takes a lot to really. The one time that actually the one time that there was a huge conflict was there was an issue with some of our van drivers were we found out had been uh, not paying our cast. They were put in charge of giving our two lead cast their daily per diems and wage, and these van drivers had taken it upon themselves to pocket this money, and to also not feed our cast properly because they were in charge of feeding the cast, and I absolutely lost my temper at that, and I think yelled and yelled and yelled and fired the van drivers, and then proceeded to apologise profusely to Mooney and Blank because they'd been, in effect half starved they were being fed like gruel and also not being paid. So that was deeply distressing. That was the one time where I really, yeah, lost my cool.
The craziness of this production, and that it was shot in Cambodia, I can't help but be constantly reminded of Apocalypse Now. I realize the film is on a completely different scale, but going in there without a completed script and dealing with authorities and all kinds of stuff, was that ever a sort of a reference point in conversation? I'm sure you've seen Hearts of Darkness. Is did you ever kind of think of that picture during the making of Ruin?
Yeah, look, the one time it was I suppose echoed most clearly was we were working with a Vietnam veteran, an American gentleman from Texas who operated a small microlight aeroplane tour business, and he'd offered for a very nominal sum to take a flight up and down this particular stretch of river at sunset with two cameras strapped to the his microlight aeroplane, and he turned up on the day we were strapping our two only cameras to this microlight, and I think he'd drunk. Was it? I think yeah. We found out he'd drunk at least like a bottle of scotch, and we had 20 minutes to get this scene, and uh, there was something about him. He was like, as ridiculous as the situation was, we let him go up in the air because he convinced us that he knew what he was doing. Um, but he just at that moment had this like great court jester quality that reminded me almost exactly of Dennis Hopper's photojournalist character at the end of Apocalypse Now. So that was probably the closest like nudge to that film. But yeah, look, I mean, our our entire budget would have been the catering budget on a day of Apocalypse Now. So yeah, a scale that yeah is just so incomparable. It's sort of insane, but certainly the same heat, definitely the same temperature.
In going into such an ambitious film like this with $8,000, I mean, there's a lot of short films in this country that cost much more than that. Uh, I'm so interested when you say that there's no excuses anymore to not make films. So I just wondered if you could just elaborate on that no excuses a little more, because I find that quite inspiring. That but maybe we're tricked in this country that we need government funding because in America there is no government funding. People just sort of do it, or they find finance. How do you find the difference between Australian filmmaking and other filmmaking around the world? Like, what's the cultural difference there?
Yeah, look, I've spent probably half of the last couple of years in the United States working on a couple of projects, and have met literally dozens of really unbelievably inspiring and hardworking filmmakers over there. And as you say, because there is a very distinct lack of government subsidies for those filmmaking communities, there's a really beautiful and healthy sense of community between directors, producers, cinematographers, in which people just help each other make work. And there's also no blurring of the lines between this false sense of a potential commercial outcome. People know that they're making art. They know they're making art with friends, and as a result, they try to do it as much as they possibly can because it's enjoyable to make art with friends. So you get filmmakers like Nathan Silver making at least a feature film per year. You get filmmakers that are far more prolific than the filmmakers. Although Ivan Sen is definitely like he's making a lot right now. It's great, and it's also fine to see that not every one of those films is necessarily amazing. It's like filmmakers who are using their medium to explore and to take risks, and then also to fail. That's also hugely important. And I think you make a film every 5, 6, 7 years. The pressure on that film to be both commercially successful and artistically, a quantum leap for you as an artist. I'm much more interested in the sketches between those, the larger opus, I suppose.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I can't wait to see the film. It's showing in Adelaide this Friday, 7 p.m., the 25th of November, at the Mercury Cinema. And I wish you the best with the rest of the rollout nationally.
Thank you so much. It's really an absolute pleasure to chat with you, and yeah, I really look forward to hearing how the film's received in Adelaide. Thanks again.